Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, I would like to show a few ways to use HiCAD as an example in the field of 3D printing. As you all know, I can model all sorts of things in HiCAD. In this case, I have simply modeled a so-called men's handbag, which I have already printed, and I'm also providing for further printing. So, in this case, you can see here that I have an engine block, and in this engine block, there are also openings for bottles and for the ice and for my carriers. And how can I now prepare these parts for printing? There are basically two options here. One option would be to go directly to the view frame, and I can say here, for example, a view-based export would be one way to do that. It is basically almost the identical way. I deliberately say almost because not every format is exported to the view frame here. The next step is for me to choose my D formats. I have options for exporting the parts in various ways. One has to imagine that the 3D printing programs can, let's say, handle the standard file types, which are the so-called STL or STEP files, which most programs can also manage. That means I either transfer it here or simply save a STEP file here, which essentially represents the exact identical representation of the model. Or I have the second option, which would actually be this standard print file, the so-called STL file. And here I can also adjust the accuracies, of course. For example, I could enter a value for the point circle, points per quarter circle, such as 100, and it will be represented more accurately. If I lower the value, it simply won't be as accurate. You just have to consider which parts I need these parts for, in the long run. To be honest, lately I have basically done almost everything, only through STEP, because I want my parts to be exactly as I modeled them, and I want to export them that way. Of course, you can also create these components in separate files here, so that I have an individual part for each piece I have modeled for my 3D print. What does it look like, basically? That means I have my program here. In this case, my slicer from Bambu. And here I have, of course, my various individual parts, which I can further process and also slice in this case. Slicing is basically nothing more than the preparation for 3D printing. You can see that when I click here, I can view the various printing methods and areas of my parts, and it will essentially show me here, for example, also sliced, meaning generated for my machine code for my printer. Here in the slicer, I can also view my other parts, which means that in this case, for example, I see this engine block would take 18 hours to print. And of course, I can then go down in this area and take a closer look at my parts, such as how my infill is, what support structures I have, and also check whether the print would be successful. The next step in this case is that I can also publish these areas or these things on the internet. This means that you can easily examine these designs here, and you can also download them and then print them yourself or further edit them at your convenience. But for me, it is very important to also see other ways in which HiCAD can be used for modeling purposes. That means I have basically modeled my engine block here with cutouts, with holes, with labels, with texts, all sorts of things, along with a freezer and everything else. And so you can model many useful parts by yourself and then print them later. I hope you enjoyed this format as well, seeing something different that can also be done with HiCAD. Because basically, I have always focused more on the construction sector, and here it is really just about the modeling techniques and how one can also use other things for prototype construction.